you very much. I appreciate it. And I just wanted to first announce that Warren Nord's giving out free onion rings. The bad news is Connie Burton just ate them. So, apologize for that. Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it. Thank you for the great bio. I appreciate it. If you notice, yeah, I am on the House Agriculture and Livestock Committee. That's what you get when you vote against the speaker. But as a positive, I think there's about 3 cows in Irving, so the livestock in Irving have way disproportionate representation of the rest of the state. So they're happy. I came here today, was asked to talk about closed primaries. I love talking about closed primaries because I carried a closed primary bill. Many of us did, and I think it's a very important issue. We do have some time today, so I can go through that, and then I'd love to open it up for any questions you could have about that or anything else.
What does cum laude mean?
It's kind of a big deal. I have many leather-bound books. It smells of rich mahogany. So closed primaries, completely different subject. Closed primaries are a really important issue in Texas. I just want to take it back. I haven't lived in Texas my whole life. I was originally from Connecticut. I moved to Texas for freedom. But one of the things I was never exposed before I moved to Texas, I lived in Connecticut, I lived in Massachusetts, and I had never lived in an open primary state before. Because one of the things that when I lived in Connecticut, when I lived in Massachusetts, they had closed primaries. And it was a completely new and completely perplexing thing to me when I was 25 years old, and I was told I could vote in any primary I wanted to, and I couldn't register with a party. And it was something that didn't make any sense to me. I had been involved in politics with the Republican Party since I was a kid. I went to my first convention probably 10 years prior to the time I moved here, and it just didn't register with me. So the first time I moved to Texas, I actually voted in the Democratic primary, just to mess things up. I mean, I was like, honestly, as a 25-year-old, I was actually thinking, I can't believe they let you do this. Okay, I'm just going to vote for all the crazy guys who have no chance in the general election. Thinking about it now, Democrats do that in our elections.
Yes, they do.
And it shouldn't be done. And I know from experience because I did it the first time I was here. Incidentally, when I first ran for office in a Republican primary, they brought up that vote in the Democratic primary. And I had to explain, just messed around. So closed primaries, Texas actually, as an open primary state, is part of the norm. However, there are many states who do have closed primaries. Texas is one of 15 states, though, which is a distinct minority with a completely open primary, meaning any person can choose to vote the Democratic or Republican primary regardless of voting history. Texas has no party registration. The Secretary of State keeps no records on if a voter is a Democrat or a Republican, just which primary elections you guys have voted in. The National Conference of State Legislatures reports that 9 states have completely closed primaries, where only declared and registered party members are allowed to vote in the Republican and Democrat primaries. Now, those aren't the only 2 options. 7 states have partially or mostly closed primaries, where the parties themselves are allowed to decide if they'll allow independent or unaffiliated voters to take part in their primaries. So combined, 16, 15 are completely closed primaries. Other states, 20 remaining states or 20-odd remaining states have hybrid systems. So some require voters to have a party identification before casting a primary ballot, but allow you to change your registration on the same day as you vote in the election. Others are open primaries only with regards to independents. So registered Democrats and Republicans can vote in their own primary, not crossover. Independents can choose either one. But of all the models, Texas is firmly in the open primary camp. This means committed, lifelong left-wing Democrats are allowed to vote in our primary to choose our candidates for our party ballot, even for statewide positions like governor, legislative, judicial races. A close primary is essential, I think, to promoting the vision of elections promoted by President Reagan when he spoke of the GOP as a revitalized second party, raising a banner of no pale pastels but bold colors which make it unmistakably clear where we stand on all of the issues troubling the people. We want bold candidates. We want an alternative vision. We don't want both parties to meld into a gray center where it's difficult to determine whether they want to do the same thing or whether they actually have a different vision for the country. Reagan's famous statement here highlights one fundamental truth that I think is very important. That the two-party system, for all the criticism it receives, is essential to our democracy. It empowers citizens to make clear, distinct choices based on their informed policy preferences. When a party platform and the candidates are watered down, it makes it more difficult for voters to express these preferences. That was the case several decades ago where there were many liberal Republicans, conservative Democrats in Texas. Now we have the two-party system and we need to present voters with a choice to vote in the general election. So open primaries exacerbate this problem. They bring both parties to where the center is, since everybody can vote in each of the primaries, which means that the voters don't necessarily have a choice in the November election. They have a choice between two parties trending towards the same issues. Another problem with open primaries is it wrests control of the party from people like you, people who are the ones who drive the party, the ones who attend the convention, who are members of the SREC, who drive policy in the Republican Party. You guys have less of a voice. So when we are actually on the ballot, there's an option for independent candidates. There's an option to be a member of the Libertarian Party. There's an option for other candidates to get on the ballot who aren't members of the two main parties. But those two main parties should be able to control their brand, which is very important. Branding's important. The Republican Party nationally, the Republican Party in the state of Texas owns a brand the same that Humperdinck's Pub owns a brand, the same that McDonald's owns a brand, or AT&T. And they should be able to control that brand and what that brand means. But when you have members of the other party coming in to determine what a Republican is and what a Democrat is, that wrests control of that brand over the people who are actually members of the party. So, actually, because of this, and I think because of the way it's actually positioned, Democrats and left-leaning independents actually have a strong incentive not to vote in their own primaries. And in a state like Texas where there's gerrymandered districts based on party affiliation, Democrats and left-leaning independents in rural areas that generally vote Republican have a strong incentive not to vote in their own primary because it's unimportant. They have an incentive to enter the Republican primary and water down whoever the eventual nominee will be, which is a similar dynamic to the speaker's race in the House, correct? So the Democrats in the House elected and supported and were the power base of Joe Straus as Speaker. He received almost every Democrat vote when he ran for Speaker. And what happened was the Democrats were his power base. The Democrats didn't vote for a Democrat because they knew that would water down their vote because Republicans had the majority. So a tiny minority of Republicans banded together with the Democrat Party in the House and elected Joe Straus Speaker of the House. And what did we have? We had an actual minority of Democrats holding the power in the Texas House, which we saw year after year. Mark Jones from Rice University did a study. He does a bunch of studies that I think are absolutely great. He does most conservative to least conservative. He does one study that plots win rates of legislators in the House. And because of this dynamic that elected the Speaker, he showed that even though there was a 2/3 majority in the Texas House, the Republicans were on the winning side of votes less often than the Democrats. In fact, even when we had a two-thirds margin in each house, and I think it was a session before I came, so it was a 2013 session, we had a 2/3 majority, but Democrat win rates were over 90% on average. Republican win rates were on average 85%. And people like Jonathan Stickland and Matt Schaefer were at about 30%. So the legislation that got passed was not acceptable to your conservative representatives 70% of the time, but 95% of the time the Democrats agreed with. And that's the dynamic that you got from effectively an open primary in the Texas House Speaker's race. Incidentally, Freedom Caucus in the Texas House changed that this year, and that's not going to happen again. We pushed for, we sent a letter calling a caucus meeting to form a process for choosing the speaker the way every other state does it. And we effectively have a closed primary to select a Republican speaker candidate that then the House will vote on. And as Republicans, we're trying to get every House member to pledge to support that Republican speaker nominee. So if you see anyone on the list, you can find it at the Republican Party of Texas website. One of the best things that James Dickey's done is actually holding people to this pledge. You see any House members who haven't signed the pledge, ask them why. Ask them why they won't support the House Speaker Republican. Because we need to do that. So getting back to what I think is the same dynamic in Texas elections and Texas primary elections. I think the same dynamics at play. We want Republicans to choose our candidates so we have the best candidates coming in, and Democrats aren't the power base in a district that leans heavily Republican. I think there's one other important thing, besides branding, besides the results. The principle of free association is a very essential component to American liberty. Republicans and Democrats have the right to form their own political parties with like-minded individuals with the same goals and choose candidates from their ranks without undue interference from outsiders and individuals of the other party. Democrats shouldn't have the right to hijack our process and tell us who we should nominate. Republicans shouldn't have the right to hijack their process either. We should both be able to be a member of our political parties without interference from outside of that. And I think that's a basic fundamental First Amendment right. As a practical matter, I also agree with John Gale, who is the Secretary of State from Nebraska. He wrote in an op-ed that I thought was a very good one. He said, in an open primary, choices become more a matter of popularity and less of principle. Consequently, campaigns are less of a grassroots effort by party members and are more concentrated on spending money for ads, mailings, and paid workers. Thus, the candidates without clear party credentials are advantaged by the vote of independents, and the party faithful can be divided or dissuaded at the time of the general election. Independents are customarily wary of the parties and don't often serve as campaign workers or hold fundraisers for candidates. Those who do the yeoman's work in the trenches, knocking on doors, making phone calls, raising money, putting up yard signs, and those who deserve the right to choose their party candidates without the skewing of the primary by independents. I think that's very important. Money, particularly, becomes more important in primaries that are open, because in primaries that are closed, it's you, the people who know, who are there every day, that affect the election. I mean, we saw that in our convention. We saw our party chairman get tremendously outspent, but it wasn't decided by who spent the most money. The final vote wasn't decided by who spent the most money. No matter how many mailers you received, you knew who you were going to vote for, whoever that might be. Why? Because you do this every day. You take in more information than just the advertisements. But the people who don't affiliate with either political party might not. Therefore, the money becomes more important. So effectively, it makes money a more important factor in elections when the primary where the candidate's actually being chosen is the primary election, not the general election. So, in other words, closed primaries tend to be more about the things elections should be about. Issues, politics, policies, what will be better for the people as a whole, visions that might be more than just a soundbite issue, but might actually be visions for our country 10, 20 years down the road. That's what these elections become about. That's what elections should be about. Research demonstrates pretty clearly that both partisans on the left, on the right, are those most clearly informed about the issues and the policies. The party faithful that actually take the time to engage and volunteer should have more say in the candidate choice than those who don't. And academic research on the actual effects of open primaries is mixed. However, I think it's clear that open primaries tend to lead to more moderate candidates, i.e. less principled candidates. There's a former policy advisor to Bill Clinton, Bill Galston. Thank God there's only one President Clinton to speak about that. He repeatedly called for open state primaries from his perch at the left of center of Brookings Institution. Bernie Sanders has often urged states to adopt more open primaries. That likely means we should not be doing that. During this recent election cycle, Houston Chronicle columnist Chris Tomlinson, in an article decrying extremists like you, apparently we're seeking to destroy the Texas economy, reminded readers that the most important vote anyone can cast is the Republican primary, at least until Texas Democrats prove they can compete statewide. The implication being that Democrats should vote in the GOP primary to back Joe Strauss candidates instead of voting in the less relevant Democratic primary. So we know this is happening. I mean, on a Texas Tribune elections panel in 2015, there's a former moderate Republican and Joe Strauss ally, Patricia Harless, who's from Spring, Texas, told an audience, quote, "That's how I get elected a lot of times, is because my constituents that are Democrats vote in the Republican primaries because they know there are not competitive races on the Democratic side." Democratic Party Chair Gilberto Hinojosa explained to the Texas Tribune why the vaunted blue wave never materialized in this primary. His explanation was that a lot of Democrats voted in the Republican primary, especially in our rural seats. There was a member of the Aledo ISD school board, Bobby, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Bobby Regis, who's a statewide ally of Scott Mulder, who was the anti-school choice Democrat, now Democrat, endorsing Dan Patrick's primary, his primary opponent. So, Aledo ISD member in the thick of our most recent primary season was quoted as saying, "Democrats, if you're concerned about public education, you need to cross over in the primary and vote in the Republican primary for those who support public education." Of course, he means Strauss-backed anti-school choice candidates. So, it's impossible to know the full impact of this phenomenon in Texas, but the answer is clear that it's a significant factor in our primaries. Left-leaning individuals are voting in the Republican primaries to weaken conservative candidates, hurting the Republican brand, and effectively depriving us of our right to free association. And these are the pale pastels that President Reagan warned against. To reverse this, what can we do? I mean, that's the question. I filed House Bill 1061 last session, which would have required Republican primaries to be decided by people who register as Republicans, and Democratic primaries to be decided by people who register as Democrats. You can change your party affiliation if you want, as long as it's a significant amount of time before the election, but that could be up to debate exactly how long that is. But taking that step to at least personally affiliate yourself with a party is a big one. When I used to live outside the state in close primary state, I had friends that wanted to determine the Republican primary, but they wouldn't make that step of actually calling themselves a Republican if they were a Democrat, or a Democrat if they were a Republican, because that meant something different than just voting in a primary that might happen. You were affiliating with that group. You were putting down on a sheet of paper, this is what I am. And that meant something. And that provided a deterrent to people who might want to affect the other party's election. Representatives Mike Lang, Pat Fallon, Matt Shaheen also filed similar bills to mine, or identical bills, which would put us on the same footing as like Florida, New York, and Pennsylvania, all which have closed primaries. The bill was referred to the Committee on Elections, did not receive a hearing. So, political affiliation remains decided by state laws to which primary you voted in, and the bills did not go anywhere. We're going to try again with different House leadership, but we need you to make this an issue, and this needs to come from the top down. Either from, it needs to receive support from the governor, it needs to receive support from the lieutenant governor, it needs to receive more than just limited support among representatives. We need to make it clear that this needs to be a priority because it affects everything. Policy-wise, it affects everything. And I want to point out one other thing. This is an alternative route, other than legislation. In 2008, 2007, the Idaho Republican Party passed a party rule that primaries shall be closed in the state of Idaho. That conflicted with Idaho state law, which said that primaries should be open. So in 2008, the Idaho Republican Party sued the state under the First and 14th Amendments to the Constitution to close their previously open primary system after party officials complained that too many Democrats in a deep red state were crossing over to vote. Sound familiar? The suit went to federal court and the Republican Party of Idaho won. The federal district court determined it actually was a constitutional violation to close a primary when a party wanted it closed, but state law conflicted with. Because we have the rights as Republicans to elect our candidates in the manner we wish, regardless of what the state law is. After the decision, the state legislature in Idaho established a closed primary system, so the case became moot, and there wasn't a Ninth Circuit opinion that actually affirmed or overturned that. So they dismissed the appeal based on mootness. So we don't have a definitive ruling, but there's at least a good faith argument out there for that if the Republican Party in Texas desires to have closed primaries, there's at least a good faith argument that it's our constitutional right to do so. So that's another route we could possibly take besides legislation. But I can tell you, myself, Matt Shaheen, Mike Lang, Pat Fallon, who's now going to be a senator, we'll be working hard for closed primaries. We just need we need everybody to make it a priority. We need to be one of your priorities. I know we have a lot of different things that we need to fix in this state. That's one of them that's so structural that it would make such a difference going forward on so many other issues as well, because it affects the candidates who are actually going to this. But I would love to get your questions about closed primaries, open primaries, really anything. Anything you want, warrants, onion rings, anything.